My wife called me weak in a room full of executives, and the cruelest part was not that they laughed, but that she waited for them to. Lauren Whitaker stood beside Table 7 at the annual leadership dinner inside the Grand Meridian Hotel in downtown Chicago, a champagne glass lifted in her right hand, her smile bright enough to fool anyone who did not know where to look. The ballroom glittered with white linen, silver chargers, blue uplighting, and the kind of corporate confidence that makes people speak louder than they think. Behind her, a stage screen waited dark and silent, framed by two company banners for Clear Vault Systems, the software platform her firm had built its future on. I sat 2 chairs away in a navy suit she had picked because she said my old gray one made me look like a substitute teacher. My name is Ryan Whitaker. I am 43 years old, born in Wisconsin, raised in Milwaukee, and for most of my adult life I believed silence was a form of discipline. I was wrong about one thing. Silence does not protect a marriage when the person you love has started mistaking it for permission. Lauren was 39, polished, ambitious, beautiful in the way expensive rooms reward. She worked as a senior marketing director, and that night she wanted the promotion everyone whispered about. She had spent 2 weeks preparing for the dinner, choosing her dress, rehearsing talking points, studying seating charts, and reminding me not to mention old engineering stories unless someone asked directly. Nobody ever asked directly. That was how she liked it. At first, the jokes were small. Brent Keller from business development leaned back with his whiskey and said, "Ryan, you are a quiet guy. How do you survive being married to a woman who runs circles around half this company?" People chuckled. Lauren touched his arm lightly, the way she did when she wanted someone powerful to feel clever. I smiled politely because old habits are hard to bury in public. Then Brent added, "Must be exhausting, Lauren, dragging a man with no ambition to these things." The table laughed louder. I looked at my water glass and watched a bead of condensation slide down the side like. It knew where to go, and I did not. Lauren could have stopped it. One sentence would have done it. Instead, she lifted her glass and said, "Ryan is sweet, but he is weak. He has never been the kind of man who can lead a room." The laughter came fast, clean, and careless. It rolled across the table, bounced off the crystal, and settled somewhere behind my ribs. I did not speak. I did not defend myself. I only folded my napkin once, set it beside my plate, and looked past Lauren's shoulder as the stage screen behind her flickered from black to blue. The CEO stepped toward the podium, holding a remote in one hand. Lauren kept smiling, still unaware that the truth she had spent years ignoring was about to introduce me better than I ever could. The CEO's remote clicked once, and the ballroom lights dimmed just enough to turn every champagne glass into a small mirror. Lauren still had one hand on Brent Keller's sleeve, laughing softly at something he said after her little speech about me. And I remember thinking how strange it is when Betrayal wears perfume and a company name badge. Nobody at Table 7 looked at me for more than a second. That was the mercy of humiliation in public. People glance, laugh, then look away because staring too long would require them to admit they enjoyed it. I kept my eyes on the stage. The blue screen behind the CEO pulsed with the Clear Vault Systems logo, a silver lock inside a circle, clean and modern, nothing like the first version I built in a rented office above a laundromat in Milwaukee. Back then, the lock icon was crooked because I made it myself at 3 in the morning with free design software and too much gas station coffee in my bloodstream. Lauren knew that version of me once. Or maybe she only knew the parts that served the story she wanted to tell. The CEO, Martin Hale, smiled out at the room and said, "Tonight is about expansion, but before we talk about where Clear Vault is going, we need to honor where it came from." Applause rose politely. Corporate applause has a sound all its own. Careful, measured, hands meeting just hard enough to look supportive without wrinkling a cuff. Lauren straightened beside me, thinking. This was the moment that would move her closer to vice president. She had spent months positioning herself near this expansion deal, presenting strategy decks, arranging client dinners, making sure her name traveled through the right conversations. She believed she understood the room. That was her mistake. Rooms have walls, and walls have wiring. I knew the wiring. I had built most of it. Brent leaned toward her and whispered something. She smiled without looking away from the stage. Then Martin continued. "Many of you joined this company after Clear Vault became a national platform. You know the brand, the clients, the growth. But some of you may not know the man who wrote the original architecture, secured the first hospital network contract, and later stepped away from the spotlight, while keeping this company alive through the hardest year we ever had. A fork touched a plate somewhere to my left. Small sound, sharp as a pin dropping in a church. Lauren's smile slowed. Not stopped. Slowed. Her hand left Brent's sleeve. I felt it happen beside me like a change in air pressure before a storm. I did not turn my head. I did not need to. I could feel her beginning to count backward through things she had ignored. The nights I took calls in the garage. The legal envelopes from Whitaker Holdings she never opened because she said finance made her eyes glaze over. The annual reports I left on the kitchen island that she moved under a stack of catalogs. Martin raised the remote again. This video was prepared with permission from Whitaker Holdings as part of our final expansion announcement. There it was. My last name entered the room before I did. Lauren turned toward me then, just slightly. I could see her from the corner of my eye, her face still arranged for public confidence. But the first fracture had opened underneath. Brent looked confused. He mouthed, "Whitaker," like the name had become heavier in his mouth. I picked up my water glass, took one calm sip, and set it down exactly where it had been. The screen changed. Grainy footage appeared, old and imperfect, showing a younger man in a gray hoodie standing in front of a whiteboard covered with server diagrams. The room went quiet. Lauren stared at the screen, and 10 years of contempt met one photograph she had never bothered to ask about. The photograph on the screen pulled me out of the ballroom and dropped me back into Milwaukee before the money, before the suits, before Lauren learned to measure strength by who controlled the conversation. I was 32 in that footage, thinner, tired, wearing a gray hoodie with one sleeve pushed up because the radiator in that rented office either froze us or cooked us alive. Behind me was a whiteboard full of arrows, encryption models, access layers, and one sentence written in black marker. Make the system safer than the people using it. That was ClearVault before it had a logo clean enough for banners and a client list long enough to impress investors. It was 3 engineers, 2 folding tables, secondhand monitors, and a coffee maker that sounded like it was fighting for its life every morning. The ballroom watched that younger version of me explain the original security architecture, and I felt Lauren watching the man beside her become harder to dismiss. The video cut to a photo of me shaking hands with the hospital network director after our first contract. My hair was longer then, my shirt wrinkled, my smile exhausted and real. I remembered that day because Lauren had been there after midnight, sitting on the floor of our 700-square-foot apartment with Thai takeout going cold between us while I reread the contract until the words blurred. She rubbed my shoulder and said, "You do not need to be loud to be strong." I carried that sentence for years like a coin in my pocket. Maybe that was why her words at the table cut so deep. She had not invented the insult from nothing. She had taken the thing she once loved and turned it into evidence against me. The video continued. Martin's voice came through the speakers, measured and respectful. Ryan Whitaker co-founded ClearVault Systems in 2014, built the platform architecture that still protects our largest clients. And when the company nearly collapsed during the capital freeze 3 years ago, Whitaker Holdings stepped in to stabilize payroll, retain engineers, and preserve every major contract. A murmur moved through the room. Not loud, just enough. The kind of sound a crowd makes when a hidden wall opens. Brent stared at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen like math had betrayed him. Lauren's champagne glass lowered until it rested against the tablecloth, untouched. I could see her hand around the stem. Her knuckles had gone pale. She whispered my name, but the video was louder than she was, and for once, that felt right. I did not answer. I watched the screen show an old photo of my father in a hospital chair, because that was the part people never connected. I stepped away from public leadership when his heart started failing. Board meetings turned into clinic visits. Investor calls became pharmacy runs. I chose quiet because family needed me louder than ambition did. Lauren knew pieces of that story, but she treated my retreat like shrinking. She saw fewer speeches and assumed less power. She saw me working from home in a plain sweatshirt and decided I had stopped becoming someone. But some men do not disappear when they leave the stage. They move behind the structure and keep the building standing. Martin paused on stage as the video ended with the old ClearVault lock icon fading into the new one. Then he turned toward table 7. Every head followed his eyes. The The room that had laughed at me minutes earlier now had to decide where to put its face. Lauren sat frozen beside me, and the silence around her was no longer empty. It was full of every question she should have asked before she called me weak. Martin Hale stepped down from the podium and began walking toward table 7, and I felt the room shift with every step he took. A few minutes earlier, people had leaned back in their chairs to laugh at me. Now they were leaning forward to understand me. That difference should have felt satisfying. Instead, it felt like standing under a spotlight I had spent years avoiding. Martin was a tall man with silver hair, the kind of CEO who knew how to make gratitude sound like strategy. He stopped beside my chair and placed one hand lightly on the back of it, not claiming me, just acknowledging I was there. "Ryan," he said into the handheld microphone, "I know you prefer to stay out of these rooms, but this company would not be expanding tonight without you." Applause started slowly, uncertain at first, then grew as people realized permission had been given to respect the man they had just watched get mocked. Brent clapped without looking at me. His face had gone the color of wet paper. Lauren did not clap. She sat beside me with her lips slightly parted, still holding the champagne glass as if she had forgotten what hands were for. I could feel her searching backward through our marriage, trying to find the moment where I had hidden this from her. But the truth was worse. I had not hidden it well. She had simply stopped caring enough to see it. Whitaker Holdings mail came to our house every quarter. I took board calls in the den. I flew to San Francisco twice a year for investor meetings she called your little tech errands. When annual reports arrived, she slid them aside for home catalogs and asked if I could pick up dry cleaning. I used to think that was marriage, two people busy in different directions, forgiving what the other did not understand. Now I knew it was something lonelier. It was being visible and still unseen. Martin continued, "Before our expansion agreement is finalized, I want our leadership team to understand that Whitaker Holdings is not an outside name on a term sheet. It is part of our history, and Ryan Whitaker is the reason our platform survived when survival was not guaranteed." The applause grew warmer. Someone stood near the front. Then another. A standing ovation in corporate America is rarely pure emotion. It is calculation, respect, self-preservation, and surprise all dressed in the same motion. I stayed seated for 2 beats longer than I should have, not because I wanted drama, but because my legs felt distant from me. Lauren leaned closer and whispered, "Ryan, why did you never tell me?" That was the first sentence she offered after calling me weak. Not "I am sorry." Not "I was wrong." "Why did you never tell me?" As if my silence had tricked her into cruelty. I did not answer. Not then. The title of the night had already been written by her own words, and I refused to edit it for her comfort. Martin offered his hand. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and shook it. Cameras near the media table turned toward us. Lauren's posture changed instantly, trained by years of events. She straightened, lifted her chin, and almost smiled, ready to place herself back inside the winning frame. But the room had learned too much too quickly. Brent looked down at his plate. The woman from finance across from us murmured, "I had no idea," and someone beside her whispered, "Neither did she." That whisper reached Lauren. I saw it land. Her face did not collapse all at once. It lost support in layers. First the smile, then the chin, then the proud stillness she wore like jewelry. Martin asked me to say a few words. The microphone hovered between us. I looked at it, then at Lauren, then at the stage screen where my younger self still stood frozen in a gray hoodie beside the first server rack. A room full of executives waited for me to rescue the moment with grace or sharpen it into revenge. I did neither. I shook my head once and let Martin keep the microphone. For the first time that night, my silence belonged only to me. Martin moved the program forward with the skill of a man who understood both business and damage control. He thanked the engineering teams, praised the expansion partners, and guided the room back into safe corporate language. But the temperature at table 7 never recovered. Conversation returned around us in careful pieces, like people stepping over broken glass without wanting to admit something had shattered. Brent Keller suddenly found his dessert plate fascinating. The finance director across from me asked Martin's assistant a question she already knew the answer to. Lauren sat beside me with her hands folded in her lap, no longer touching her champagne glass, no longer leaning toward the powerful men she had spent the evening trying to impress. For years, she had believed a room could be mastered by posture, timing, and the right laugh at the right joke. Now the room had mastered her with one fact. I picked up my water glass and took another sip because my throat felt dry, not from fear, but from the old ache of remembering too much at once. I remembered Milwaukee before Clearvault had clients, before Lauren had a designer wardrobe, before people said expansion and stakeholder like those words had always belonged to us. We lived in a 700-square-foot apartment over a bakery that made the whole hallway smell like sugar at 5 in the morning. The bedroom window stuck in summer, and the radiator clanked all winter like a tired old man trying to keep us alive. Lauren used to sit cross-legged on the floor beside my desk while I worked through security models, reading marketing textbooks with a highlighter between her teeth. She would fall asleep under a blanket while my keyboard clicked in the dark. Back then, she did not call my quiet weakness. She called it focus. She said I made chaos feel manageable. She said the world was loud enough and she liked that I was not. Maybe ambition did not change her all at once. Maybe it changed the way water changes stone, slowly, patiently, until the shape is no longer what it was. The first time she corrected me in public, it was small. At a client reception in Oak Brook, I started explaining a technical risk, and she laughed lightly, touched my arm, and said, "He gets lost in the weeds sometimes." Everyone smiled. I smiled too because it was easier than making the moment heavy. Then came other moments. Do not wear those shoes. Do not mention the old office. Do not tell people you stepped away to care for your father. It sounds like you could not handle leadership pressure. She edited me in small cuts, and I kept calling it partnership because I loved her. A waiter placed coffee in front of me, and the smell pulled me back to the ballroom. Lauren leaned close, her voice barely moving the air. "Can we talk outside?" I looked at the stage, where Martin was introducing the next section of the agreement presentation. The Whitaker Holdings logo appeared in the corner of a slide. My last name sat there in blue and silver, calm as a courthouse seal. I did not answer her, not because I wanted to punish her with silence, but because any answer would have given her something to manage, an explanation to twist, an apology to demand, a soft place to step while she rebuilt herself in front of witnesses. I had spent too many years lending her my calm so she could call herself composed. So I stayed still. Lauren's breath caught, just once. "Ryan," she whispered again, and for the first time that night, my name sounded less like a request and more like a door closing. Brent shifted in his chair and muttered, "I should not have said that earlier." He did not look at me when he said it. I turned my water glass a quarter-inch clockwise and kept my eyes forward. His apology was not courage. It was weather adjustment. The wind had changed, and he was simply turning his face away from the rain. On stage, Martin spoke about final approval, strategic partnership, and long-term platform control. Lauren heard every word. I knew she did because her shoulders tightened when he said controlling interest. She had married a man she thought she could shrink in public, only to learn that the public room was standing on a system he had built in private. That was not revenge. That was architecture. And architecture does not need to shout when the lights come on. The presentation moved into numbers, and numbers were the one language Lauren had never bothered to learn from me. On the stage, Martin pointed to quarterly projections, integration costs, renewal rates, and a timeline for the expansion that would take Clearvault deeper into healthcare networks across the Midwest. The slide looked clean and simple, all blue lines and polished icons, but I knew the years hiding underneath it. I knew the failed demos, the emergency patches, the hospital administrator in Madison who gave us one last chance after our system crashed during a trial run. I knew the night my father called from a clinic parking lot because he could not remember where he had left his car, and I still took an investor call 20 minutes later from the front seat of my rental. People see a clean chart and think success moves in straight lines. It does not. It crawls, stumbles, bleeds time, and asks you what you are willing to carry without applause. Lauren sat beside me, watching the numbers. Explain what my voice never had. Her hands were still in her lap, fingers pressed together so tightly the diamond on her ring caught the ballroom light in sharp little flashes. That ring came from the first real distribution Whitaker Holdings ever paid me after the capital freeze ended. I remembered handing it to her in the kitchen of our townhouse in Evanston, nervous like a kid, even though we had already been married for 6 years. She cried then. She said she knew I would always find a way. Later, when the ring became something she wore to events, the story changed. She told people I had finally learned presentation mattered. Funny how pride edits memory until gratitude sounds like coaching. Martin clicked to the next slide, and the words Final Approval Authority appeared under the Whitaker Holdings logo. I felt Lauren go still. Not the public stillness she used when posing for photos. A private stillness. The kind that happens when a person realizes the floor has moved and nobody else is surprised. Martin explained that the expansion agreement required approval from Whitaker Holdings due to controlling stake provisions established during the stabilization round. He said it plainly, without drama, but the words did what anger never could. They placed me at the center of the deal Lauren had spent months trying to orbit. Brent rubbed one hand over his mouth. The finance director avoided Lauren's eyes. Across the table, a younger manager whispered to someone. She did not know? Nobody answered. They did not have to. Lauren leaned toward me again, but this time she did not whisper. She barely breathed the words. You approve this? I looked at the screen, at my last name glowing in the corner, and gave no answer. The silence was not empty. It was full of contracts, board minutes, ignored envelopes, and every time she told me to stay quiet so she could look important. Martin continued. Ryan has already reviewed the final terms with our board, and pending tonight's formal acknowledgement, we are ready to proceed. Applause followed, cautious but real. Lauren flinched at the word reviewed. I knew why. For months, she had spoken about the expansion at home as if she were pulling it across the finish line herself. Strategy decks on the dining table. Calls from the patio. Late nights rehearsing phrases about brand elevation and market trust. I had listened, made coffee, asked if she needed anything, and never once told her she was sitting 3 feet from the person whose signature mattered most. Maybe that sounds cruel. It was not. Cruel would have been using the knowledge to humiliate her sooner. I had stayed quiet because I hoped one day she would ask about my work with the same curiosity she gave strangers in tailored suits. She never did. When Martin invited the leadership team to raise a glass to the partnership, everyone stood. Lauren stood too, but slowly, like her body had to negotiate with the truth before obeying. I remained seated for a moment, then stood because manners still mattered, even when marriage did not. Glasses lifted around us. Crystal caught light. Smiles returned to faces that knew how to survive awkwardness. Lauren raised her glass beside mine, but she did not look at the room anymore. She looked at me. Her eyes were wet, not enough for anyone else to notice, just enough for me to remember the woman who once believed I was strong because I did not need applause. Martin toasted the future. The room repeated the words. I did not. I only touched the rim of my glass lightly to the air and set it back down. That night, the truth kept speaking in public, and I kept my promise to myself. I did not say a single word to save Lauren from what she had already said. After the toast, the ballroom tried to become normal again, but normal had left table 7 the moment my face appeared on that screen. People resumed their conversations with careful voices. Forks touched plates. A waiter refilled water glasses. Someone near the front laughed too loudly at a joke that was not funny enough to deserve it. Corporate rooms are good at recovery. They know how to fold embarrassment into small talk and tuck discomfort under the linen. Lauren was not recovering. She stood beside me with her glass still raised halfway, frozen in a posture that belonged to a woman from 5 minutes earlier. I could feel her wanting to pull me into the hallway, wanting to turn a public collapse into a private negotiation where her voice, her tears, her explanations could soften the edges. I did not move. Martin returned to the podium and introduced the next executive, but the center of the room had shifted. Men who had ignored me all night suddenly nodded when our eyes met. Women from the strategy team whispered behind their programs and then looked away when Lauren glanced over. Brent Keller excused himself, claiming he needed to check a message, though his phone never lit up. He walked away from the table with the stiff shoulders of a man who had laughed at the wrong person and knew the receipt was already printed. Lauren finally sat down. Slowly, carefully, as if sitting too fast might make the whole room notice she was shaking. I looked at the stage, but my mind was back in our kitchen 2 weeks earlier, when she stood near the island with garment bags over one arm and told me the dinner mattered. Please do not make this one of your quiet nights, she had said. I need people to see I belong there. I asked her what she meant. She sighed like I was making her explain gravity. Just be normal. Supportive. Do not drift into technical talk. Do not undersell me by looking uncomfortable. I remember nodding because peace had become a reflex. I remember thinking marriage should not feel like being briefed before a press conference. Back in the ballroom, Lauren leaned close enough that her perfume cut through the smell of coffee and filet sauce. "Ryan, please," she whispered. "Say something." That was almost enough to make me turn. Not because of the plea, but because of the word please. She had not used it much with me anymore. Requests had become instructions. Instructions had become corrections. Corrections had become contempt dressed as ambition. I kept my eyes forward. On stage, the executive spoke about market confidence, but the real lesson in confidence was sitting beside me, watching hers drain through a crack she made herself. Lauren tried again. I did not know they were going to do that. I believed her. That was the one thing she said that night I did believe. She had not known the video would play. She had not known Martin would name Whitaker Holdings. She had not known the founder photo existed in the archive. She had not known because knowing would have required curiosity, and curiosity is respect before it becomes information. I took my napkin from the table, folded it once more, and placed it beside my plate. The motion was small, but she saw it. Her eyes followed my hands like she feared they were packing away more than cloth. Around us, the applause rose for another presentation slide, then faded. Lauren's voice broke thinner. I only said that because Brent was joking. Still, I said nothing. The truth had already answered that. Brent did not make her laugh. Brent did not lift her glass. Brent did not choose the word weak. That word had been living somewhere inside her long before it found an audience. A photographer passed near our table, camera lowered, unsure whether to capture the newly honored stakeholder or avoid the wreckage beside him. I gave him neither. No smile. No pose. No performance. The strongest choice I made that night was not revealing who I was. The room did that for me. The strongest choice was refusing to help Lauren pretend she had not revealed who she was. The dinner ended with polite applause, polished smiles, and a room full of people pretending they had not watched a marriage change shape in real time. Martin shook hands with board members near the stage. Executives gathered in small circles, speaking carefully, their eyes moving toward me and then away from Lauren like they were trying not to stare at a cracked window. I waited until the final slide faded from the screen before I stood. Lauren stood too quickly beside me, almost knocking her chair back, then caught it with both hands. The small sound drew a few glances. She hated that. Not the chair. The glances. For years, she had lived by controlling what people saw, but that night the room had seen too much without my help. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. Brent hovered near the aisle, pale and awkward, holding his phone like it could excuse him from being human. "Ryan," he said. "About earlier, I was just messing around." I looked at him for the first time that night. He was not sorry for the insult. He was sorry the insult had become expensive. I gave him the same silence I had given Lauren. His mouth closed. Good. Some men only understand a locked door when they are standing outside it. Lauren followed me through the ballroom toward the lobby, her heels tapping fast against the marble floor. The Grand Meridian lobby was all gold light, tall windows, winter coats, and quiet wealth. Outside, Chicago traffic moved through wet streets, headlights smeared across the glass like paint. I could see our reflection in the window as we passed. She looked elegant, shaken, still beautiful in the way a vase remains beautiful after someone notices the crack. I looked tired. Not victorious. Not cruel. Just tired in a way sleep would not fix. Near the elevators, she finally stepped in front of me. "Ryan, stop." I stopped because I was raised to be decent, not because she still had the right to command me. She glanced around the lobby. A few colleagues were close enough to pretend they were not listening. Her voice dropped. "You embarrassed me." There it was. The first full sentence she chose in private. Not "I hurt you." Not "I should not have said it." "You embarrassed me." I looked at her face and saw the whole marriage in that one line. Even now, the wound that mattered most to her was public. I said nothing. She pressed her lips together, fighting panic with posture. "How was I supposed to know?" she whispered. "You never explain anything. You hide behind silence, and then suddenly everyone knows something I do not." I watched the elevator numbers change above her shoulder. 21, 20, 19. Strange what your mind notices when the last thread breaks. She had turned ignorance into accusation. She had not asked, so I had hidden. She had not listened, so I had deceived. She had laughed, so I had embarrassed her by being more than the joke. The elevator opened with a soft chime. I stepped around her. She reached for my sleeve, then stopped before touching me, maybe because a vice president from legal had just walked into the lobby and looked our way. Even in collapse, she remembered the audience. "Please," she said, smaller now. "Can we talk upstairs?" I looked at her then. Really looked. The woman from Milwaukee was somewhere inside that face, buried under years of correction, ambition, and applause addiction. I wanted to feel only anger. Anger would have been clean, but grief has a longer reach. It touched the old apartment, the Thai takeout, the shoulder rubs, the sentence she once gave me like a blessing. "You do not need to be loud to be strong." I did not answer her. I stepped into the elevator alone. The doors began closing. For 1 second, she looked like she might follow, but the people in the lobby were watching, and pride held her by the wrist. The doors shut between us without a sound worth remembering. I rode up to the 12th floor, took off the suit she had chosen for me, packed my overnight bag, and placed the sealed envelope from my attorney on the desk where she would find it in the morning. Then I sat by the window, watching Chicago shine below, and kept my silence all the way through the night. Morning came without mercy. It slid through the hotel window in pale gray strips, catching the edges of the Chicago skyline and turning the glass towers into cold mirrors. I had not slept. I had sat in the chair beside the window until the city changed from headlights to office lights, my packed bag resting near the door, the sealed envelope still on the desk where I left it. Lauren came in sometime after 2 in the morning. I heard the card reader beep, the door open, the careful pause when she saw me awake. She did not speak. Neither did I. She moved through the suite quietly, taking off earrings, setting her clutch on the dresser, washing her face in the bathroom with the door half closed. Once, she stood in the doorway wearing a hotel robe, looking at me like a person trying to read a language she had once known and forgotten. I kept my eyes on the city. Some silences are punishment. Mine was not. Mine was the last safe place I had left. At 7:15, I stood, buttoned a clean shirt, and placed my wedding ring beside the envelope. The small sound it made against the desk was softer than it should have been for something that heavy. Lauren turned from the coffee machine. Her face looked tired beneath the careful makeup she had tried to rebuild. "Ryan," she said, but stopped when she saw the envelope. The attorney's letterhead did what my voice would not. It told her the night before had not been a misunderstanding waiting for repair. She crossed the room slowly, picked it up, and read the first page. Legal separation, asset boundaries, residence arrangements, counsel contact. The words were ordinary. That made them worse. She looked up at me, and for the first time since the dinner, there was no audience for her to perform toward. No Brent, no board members, no polished table, just a hotel room, a quiet man, and the truth she had laughed at until it stood taller than she did. "You planned this," she whispered. I looked at the ring on the desk. I prepared for it. Her eyes filled. "Because of last night." I shook my head once. That would have made it too simple. Last night was not the disease. It was the test result. I thought about every small correction, every public joke, every time she treated my quiet like a flaw she had to explain to strangers. I thought about the annual reports she never opened, the calls she mocked, the work she dismissed because it did not arrive with applause. "No," I said, speaking to her for the first time since the toast. My voice sounded rough from disuse. "Because last night, you finally said out loud what you had been living for years." She lowered the pages. I was embarrassed. I was trying to fit in. "You fit in," I said. That was the problem. The sentence landed between us, clean and final. She sat on the edge of the bed as if her knees had given up on pride. "I loved you," she said. Maybe she had. Maybe in Milwaukee, under the rattling radiator, with cold takeout and security diagrams spread across a folding desk, she had loved the man before the world taught her to rank him. But love that needs an audience to remember respect is not enough to build a home. I picked up my bag. "I loved you too," I said. "That is why I stayed quiet for so long." She looked at the ring, then at the envelope, and her face crumpled in. A way I did not enjoy. I had imagined relief, maybe even justice. What I felt was grief with the lights turned on. At the door, she said, "So that is it? You were just leaving." I paused with my hand on the handle. Outside, housekeeping carts rolled down the hallway, wheels squeaking softly over carpet. The world was already moving on. "No," I said. "I am finally going where I do not have to shrink to make someone else feel tall." I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Behind me, Lauren said my name once, smaller than I had ever heard it. I did not turn around. Not because I hated her. Because if I turned, I might start explaining again, and I was done explaining my worth to someone who only recognized it after a room full of executives did. By noon, Whitaker Holdings approved the expansion without changing a line. By evening, I was on the interstate back toward Milwaukee, the sky wide and winter blue over Lake Michigan, my phone silent in the cup holder. She had called me weak because I would not fight for a place at her table. She never understood that the strongest thing I ever did was leave the table without saying another word.